felt one time, then I fell again. I fell a third time, can't get away from the sin. I keep falling, then I come back to you, crawling, asking forgive me now I'm ballin', knowing that I let you down, appalling. I don't wanna jeopardize my calling. When I hear your voice no more I'm halting. I just wanna live in the world you're revolving. I am so imperfect I'm getting involved in these flesh-tied friends, the blind consulting, pulling me away from the world and revolting. Asking for forgiveness is probably insulting, but you keep taking me back and you're vaulting. Give me chances. You keep giving me chances. You give me chances. You just keep giving me chances. King. Royalty, stand up, brand up, fam up, hand out, no way, hands up, know what, name that, it's mine, claim that, it's time, message, we shine, above all, the decline, the darkness cannot last, the shadow of my past, before I gain knowledge of heritage, I have the bloodline that I share, most powerful out here, the mover of mountains is who I am touting, the richest among us is who I'm the son of, from sundown to sun up, that's how I the come up, position is just mine, the favor in due time, can't have it, man you lying, the powerless you trying, enemy beneath me, there's nothing to teach me, the people receive me, cause my God complete me, and my God does keep me, and my God they free me, and my God redeem me, and my God relieve me, I'm king in the million, crown me, I am winning my position, God's giving, God's in it, God's surely king. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Elevation Podcast. My name is Shawn Riff-Raff. I am here again. I think I'm about to have a great conversation. As everybody knows, I am really big on mental health. I am really big on addressing things, your hurts and pains and traumas from the past, and dealing with you. And everybody knows that about me, so it's not like a secret. Today I have a guest with me. She is a licensed psychologist and certified trauma therapist. She's been in the field for 24 years, and so I know that she has something. She's going to have something great to add to the conversation. I want to welcome everybody to the Elevation Podcast. Her name is Dawn Gullette Crosson. How are you, ma'am?
Hi, it's Dawn Gullette Crosson, and I
Gullette. I'm sorry. I was thinking about shaving, and I was looking at myself right here.
I'm good, Shawn. How you doing?
I'm great. How are you?
Good.
It is so great to have you here. It's great to be able to have this conversation. I don't get to have it that often. I have a lot of guests on the Elevation Podcast, but I very rarely get to have guests that can talk. I have guests that can talk trauma, but in specific, the way that you're able to talk it. So I am appreciative at the opportunity to talk to you. So listen, tell us before we get into this conversation, tell us a little bit about you, where you're from, just about yourself. What made you tick? What is the process of how you became who you are today?
That's a long story. I don't know if we have all that time, but I'll the nuts and bones of Dawn and how she went from Southwest Philadelphia to Dr. Dawn. First of all, I want to say thank you, Shawn, for taking the time to have me on. I consider it such an honor. It's very rare that I'm able to actually be in this space with someone else who is a believer as well. So that's awesome. So thank you so much for including me in today. So I'm from Southwest Philadelphia. I'm one of 7 children. I'm the baby. And education was pretty heavy in our household. And so, I knew at an early age that I was going to go to school and I was going to be a doctor, but I thought I was going to be a medical doctor,
Right.
And so I was a pretty decent student, had some behavioral stuff. My household, my mother and father were really good to me, but we did have drug and alcohol. My father had was an alcoholic, and my brothers had issues with substance abuse. So
Sure.
grew up with that piece, but very structured home for the most part in terms of school, those types of things. And so I did pretty good in school. Had some behavioral stuff, but did pretty good. Ended up getting a scholarship, grants and scholarships, fully covered to Penn State University main campus. And that was interesting coming from Southwest Philadelphia, predominantly African American population, to a non.
Yeah.
That was unique. A lot of racial division, a lot of racial conflict, that was happening at the time. And I think that was my first real experience with people that actually use the N word and
Right.
meant to hate you. Coming
Right.
up, it was used as a term of endearment. Not that it should have been, but that's how we
Right.
used it.
That's what it was.
Got to Penn State, it was like, I want to hang you in. And it's like, oh, whoa, whoa, whoa. So very interesting time up there. And I lost both my parents during my freshman year. And that was like that was, of course, was a game changer, right? 2 months
Right.
2 months apart. I'm at Penn State. It was the best 4 years of my life and the worst 4 years of my life. Penn State was an awesome opportunity in terms of education, gained so much, but I
Yeah.
was hurting and experienced my own form of trauma. Now, at that time, though, Shawn, they didn't consider that kind of thing trauma because we didn't know what we know about trauma now. You know,
Right.
they saw it as more of grief. And so I,
Right.
I attended grief counseling for a short period of time because I became very aggressive. I started acting out, and here I am, this Black girl at Penn State, getting into fights and those types of things. So there was really no mercy. It's like, get it together or get kicked out, lose the scholarship money.
Right.
And so I started going to school counseling. I got some grief counseling, and I'm not going to say it didn't benefit. It did, but what happened for me was more trauma. And so,
Wow.
of course, they didn't know. I didn't know. It wasn't until I will tell you, it's been the last 5 years where the field of trauma has really been able to identify what trauma can be. That trauma is relative and it's not this classic textbook definition. It really is,
Right.
what may be traumatic to me may not be traumatic to you.
Yeah.
And so
I, I
that's how what happened. That's the beginning years, at least.
yeah, I heard this story about I heard one story about a kid that was her the parents brought him in for a sex change, and he was changing from being a boy to a girl, and his parents brought him in, and before you can, he's like 12 or something, and before you can do that, he has to see a site, a therapist or whatever the process is, and seeing a therapist, what she got out of him is that he experienced, because his parents had another kid when he was 2, and the baby was a girl. He thought his parents didn't love the baby more than he loved him, so he wanted to be a girl.
Wow.
And that's was one of the examples. The reason I said that is one of the examples that I find that trauma to one person, where you may find something really really small or petty, to
Yes.
someone else is huge.
Yes.
And how did you get into what made you make the move towards doing like trauma based stuff?
So earlier when you and I were talking, you mentioned that your degree was in like engineering and electrical type things like that, or
Right.
sound. My undergrad initially, I started out as pre-med, and I could not tolerate, just from the pre-med classes, the blood and all those types of things. So I was like, at this time, I'm thinking this doctor thing is going out the window because I can't do it. I ended up focusing more on the engineering field, and my undergrad was computer science, actually. My
Right.
undergrad degree was computer science. At the end of that degree, I got pregnant with my oldest boy, and I had a bunch of electives. And I was like, oh, what am I going to take? And I saw all these classes that were available. And they were like centering around child psychology, child development. And I'm thinking, well, both my parents are dead. Why not take a child psychology class so that I can kind of get some of these skills for this baby I'm having? And
Right.
so I took victimologies, developmental lifespan, some courses like that. And I just really soared in them. And victimology really spoke to me because many of the people that they profile had went on to become serial killers, but had
Oh wow.
experienced a significant amount of trauma in their lives prior. And it just intrigued me. It really intrigued me. But I was at the end of my degree. Lord knows I listen. I barely got through them 4 years. I wasn't going back to change my major. So when I got out, and I did a little bit of programming in computers, and it just I was like, this isn't really what I should be doing. This isn't something. It just wasn't my calling. I was good at it, but it wasn't my calling. So I
Right.
went back to school, and I'm gonna get a master's in psychology, and that was the beginning of me starting to come into the psychology field. The way I
Right.
did trauma was at the end of my doctorate program, I was working for a local outpatient office here, and this new intervention had been developed. It was called trauma focused CBT. So this was like 2001, 2002, and the gentleman at the time, he was really a path maker here in Harrisburg. He was like he's like pioneering things, bringing new projects here. So he brought this training to our agency, and about 15 of us got trained in trauma focused CBT, and I was the only one out of the 15 to walk away to actually start to implement it because it was so revolutionary to me. It was a different approach to trauma. Prior to that, we would do like sand tray therapy. We would kind of not talk about it. We would wait for the victim to talk about it. And we all knew that this pink elephant's in the room, but don't go there. Prior to that, there wasn't really anything that I found that was beneficial that I could utilize with my clients. So I avoided trauma. But once I got this training, it was like this new arsenal was in my bag. It was powerful. It was empirically evidence based, and so I ran with it, and it turned out to be really good with it because it's such a direct model, and I'm direct, so it just kind of worked out, and I kind of just started doing it, being known to do it in the area. I live in a small area. The Black community here is small, and so I just became like in it, and I just kept training in it and got better and better, and people were connecting, people were healing, and it kind of soared and took off.
So earlier you said something, and I actually I definitely want to create some context for the people that watch. Earlier you said that you were thankful that you found a believer. How does faith, right, play a part in and how you help, or what you do? How does your faith and how does your belief in the Lord play a part in what you do?
Had it not been for Jesus Christ and my relationship with him, and I'm going to just say Jesus Christ because at the time my relationship wasn't strong, okay?
Right.
Had it not been for Jesus Christ and then those in my life, like my best friend, Pinky, and her mother, who were prayer warriors, I wouldn't be for you because after the death of my parents, I contemplated suicide every day for like 2 years. I literally wanted to die. It was, not only had I lost my parents, but the family structure just fell apart. I lost the relationship with my siblings. We were no longer close, and I was alone. I was orphaned, and outside of my friends, I was very, very alone. And so I contemplated suicide. Never went through with it, but contemplated seriously, and it was, I mean, really seriously. So I feel that it was my relationship with Christ, or the prayers of the righteous and his unwavering love and belief in me in my darkest moments. They gave me even the strength each day to wake up, to finish school, to even, go on to get married, have children, and go further in education and become later a minister. So that I would say my faith was everything because without it, I wouldn't be before you today.
So we had a conversation before this where you talked about your passion for the African American community as it relates to trauma in the African American community. What got you on that particular path? Like, what got you on the path of relating, the trauma of African American community? And I don't know. I might have 100 questions about where we're about to go right now. So I know we got limited time. I might have 100 questions. So
Right, right. Yeah, so that's a loaded question, like a loaded baked potato. So one is because I'm African American,
right.
so that kind of hit me. And the other was I started to notice. Well, the research showed that African American and people of color were least likely to seek out services, right? However, they may be at a disproportionate rate of need for services because of systematic structural racism. And so, what I started to notice within this community was that I mean, like the whole, like I would be at the Giant and I would see people and they would say, "Are you Dawn Crosson, Dr. Crosson? You're that black therapist. I heard about you. Can you treat me?" And it seemed like I would say 1 out of 5 of my clients came in that did not have trauma. So it was just this huge proportion of people that were coming through, and they said they were coming for depression or anxiety, but once we do the intake, they had a history of trauma, a history of sexual and physical abuse, and they were brown people. And I do treat all different types of populations, but with this particular thing, I'm seeing these people come in with trauma, and I'm saying, you were sexually abused. Did you get any treatment? Well, no, we didn't discuss it, I'm not here for that. I'm here for depression, not understanding that those were the links. And I just continue to see it. And then I started being asked to come speak to groups of people at schools. And in the groups, we're talking about trauma. And in these groups, it's brown people. And they're saying to me, I didn't realize that was trauma. I never thought about that. Or I didn't realize that I had some PTSD symptoms because of that. But when I listen to what you're saying, I have 5 of the 10 symptoms. So then I started doing more research, into our people, and the research was starting to grow because initially there wasn't a lot for us because we weren't going to therapy as often as our white counterparts. So the research started to grow, and it's like, okay. And then, of course, the racial pieces. So it's such a huge body of resources out there that actually kind of shows the systematic, or let me say, the ripple effects of slavery, right? And how those ripple effects have been passed down, that we can experience still some of that pain and had not even known our ancestor that was a slave. So I hope that gives you a little nutshell of how that happened for me.
Oh, that gives us big context. So so you said, you have these talks. How do you define trauma? Like, when someone says, okay, I didn't know I had so what happened in the talks for for people to say, oh my God, there's trauma. How did you define it for people to know what it was?
So that's such a big definition, but I will say that I heard one yesterday from a local internet person. I can't think of her name, social media person. She said it's too much, too fast, and too soon, right? Without the proper preparation. And so I would say trauma is a big event of any type. It doesn't have to be a big event to anyone else but you. An event occurred that was overwhelming to you, that was too much for you. And you did not feel like you had the skills to cope with it in that moment, because that's why trauma is relative. So you and I can both experience the same situation. You walk away, you can say it was a traumatic event, but it didn't traumatize you. I walk away and I say it was a traumatic event and I have trauma as a result, right? So it can be anything that you found to be overwhelming, too much, too soon, and you didn't have the resources to cope with it.
So when you recognize it in your life, so someone's listening to you and they hear and they say, how do you know that the traumatic event is what is sort of driving your decisions or today? Like how would one know that traumatic event is what drives you today?
Now that's a tough question, but it's a really good one. So there are some symptoms that, basic symptoms or common symptoms that people have that are traumatic. Now I will say that African Americans and Hispanics, we tend to experience depression and anxiety differently than some other populations. Depression tends to come out in us as irritability and aggression,
Yeah.
and the same thing with anxiety. So, but I would say, like, if you're finding yourself having flashbacks of the incident, avoiding reminders of the incident, or avoiding any type of conversation about it, or if you can't recall important details of the incident. So let's say you were abused in a certain house, and all you can remember is I was abused in a room, but I can't remember the house. The house would be an important detail. If you find yourself not able to remember important details, or if you remember being abused, but you can't see the face of the abuser while you're being abused. If you have any of those types of symptoms, hypervigilance, which is kind of like that super alertness, and also that constant rumination or overthinking what happened, then I would say that indicates that that situation may have traumatized you, or there may be some trauma there that needs to be dealt with.
Are there certain people who are just what's the word I want to use? Are there certain people who are just always, jumpy, or does that always pinpoint back to a
No, nothing always means nothing in psychology, right?
right,
So we got to get away from that. It's really no direct effect generally in psychology. A plus
right,
B doesn't always equal C, right?
right,
Depends on the person and our makeup. So you have some people that are just have high anxiety. They're just predisposed to have high anxiety, so they jump a lot. That's just how they're predisposed. Um,
right.
um, so I wouldn't say that at all. I would say no, that's not so.
So so how does one, so if they're trying to overcome trauma, what advice would you give someone trying to, really come out or overcome? Let's say the traumatic event that happened, and the way it makes you feel, and how you avoid certain places, certain, what advice would you have to someone who knows that they're dealing with it?
So of course I'm gonna say therapy because I'm a therapist, right?
Right.
The first thing I would say is consider treatment, right? Find yourself a good therapist. I would recommend that. Therapy is kind of like trying on shoes. But we try them on until you find the right fit. And so a lot of times what happens, especially for our people, as they go to therapy once or twice, it's not a good fit. Therapy don't work for me. And it's like, no, you're probably gonna need to search around, right? And if you're living
Right.
in areas that don't have like a lot of resources, it can get tough for you. But now with the virtual pieces available, you could go online and start seeking out virtual therapy therapists as well. So the first thing I would
Yeah.
recommend is therapy. The other thing I would recommend is through the process. A lot of times we are looking for people in our lives to support us in ways that they may not be able to support us in because it's
Sure.
not their training.
Right.
And so I'll
Right.
have women tell me, my husband, I go to my husband and have these conversations about what happened to me, and he shuts down. Well, I know that's your husband, and you may want him to be everything to you, but this
Right.
trauma is heavy. It's heavy,
Right.
and
Yeah.
everybody can't carry that, and everybody shouldn't carry that, right?
Yeah.
I would say the second thing is not do not expect for your resources to be able to carry your trauma. They be there as a support, but they can't carry it because it's heavy, and it's so heavy you can't carry it. So why would you expect someone else to be able to do that? And again, and speaking of supports, you want to make sure you have people in your life that are not judging you, that are supportive, and understand that this is your journey that you're on, but they're not those
Sure.
people. "Well, you should be over this by now," or "Why you got to go to a therapist," or "Why
Yeah.
it's taking so long."
Yeah.
Everybody's journey is personal. So if
Yeah.
you have people like that in your circle, that's only going to further compound the trauma because you're already carrying this guilt. A lot of times,
Right.
trauma, you carry guilt, shame. I should have did something better. I don't need you telling me that I'm doing something wrong on top of how I already feel, right?
Yeah.
For me,
Absolutely.
having a positive support system would be great too.
Man, that's so, like, that's definitely good. That's definitely good advice for people watching. What when you think about trauma in the Black community in particular, what commonalities do you see in the community that makes you, passionate about trauma in the Black community? Like, what do you see that's common in the Black community that you don't see, elsewhere?
We don't like to go to therapy. We ain't trying to go to therapy. And then when we do, we want a brown person, which I understand that. And I think that's great. But the problem is brown people only make up 1% of the mental health field. So
Wow.
the likelihood of you finding a brown person isn't impossible, but it may be slim. And so we don't like to go to therapy. We don't. And then when we go, we want brown people, which is, I understand. The other piece is therapy with people of color looks a lot different than therapy with non-people of color. And now, again,
Okay.
you're not saying for every single person, but this is
Right.
in my experience, and the research does support some of this. People of color don't like to feel like they're in therapy, right? want to walk away
Okay.
with tools, and they want to walk away with the expertise that you may give them, but they don't want to feel like they're in therapy.
Right. I see.
That relationship has to walk that fine line between therapist and girlfriend, right? If I'm too Dr. Crosson, there's a disconnect because then you
Right.
in with a power differential, and we don't like that. But if
Hmm.
I have to be Dr. Crosson enough that I don't get sucked in and we hanging out at the club because that ain't good.
Right.
I can't do that. Can't go. I can't be hanging out with you, right? So finding that balance between therapist and girlfriend, or therapist and friend, is very important. But you have to figure it out. You can't be too much of a therapist because we don't like to feel that like that piece of like we don't like that. Um, the other thing I find is that we tend not to want to deal with trauma. We
Hmm.
tend to, especially part of part of what has happened in our country, especially with people of color, we tend to be like, that's just the way it is. That's life.
Right.
You just got to
Right.
get
Right.
over it. That's my stripes. I took my licks, and it made me stronger. So
Right.
it's been a struggle identifying trauma and being able to kind of go there is really rough sometimes with our people, because it's one of those things where it's just like, hey, this is part of our life. This is the burden we carry.
Yeah. Do you find there is a lot of sort of traumatic things in the black community that we deal with, not understanding that they are actually that it was trauma?
Oh,
Like, uh,
definitely.
yeah. So do you find that we deal with a lot of stuff in the black community, and it's just part of culture, but it's
Mhm.
like this that's not healthy. Do you?
Definitely, definitely. Crime, drive-by shootings within the in the urban areas, communities.
Yeah.
We don't necessarily identify that as trauma because it's just part of where we live at, part of what we do. Um,
Right.
for years, not only did we not recognize it, but researchers didn't as well. And not, I would say now there has been a tremendous amount of growth, but we did not recognize systematic racism,
Mm-hmm.
discrimination, poverty. We did
Mm-hmm.
not know that those things, sexism, xenophobia. We did not realize that those things could be traumatic to someone.
Right. Right.
Yes, I definitely agree. So, and I see it a lot in my trainings, in therapy, when I say, well, it sounds like you're having a traumatic response to blah, blah, blah. They're like, I never thought about that. I just thought it was something that happened, but their whole being changed. And that is also something that can be a key indicator that an incident may have been traumatic for you, right? Is when you are no longer, when you walked away different, everything's
Mm-hmm.
changed for you.
Right.
And you're not that person you were the day before.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Several years ago, probably 4 or 5 years ago, is he nephew, younger cousin, something, third cousin removed, something like that, was murdered
Wow.
in a house, in some weird event or whatever. And so when I went to his funeral, he was 21, 20, 20, 21, in that neighborhood.
Yeah.
And when I went to his funeral, because he had just graduated high school a couple years before that, his funeral was filled with all of these kids.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I think it jolted me to realize how traumatic losing someone your age, how in that manner, even without that manner, it was just in that manner, is to these kids, because that's not natural. Like, it's not supposed, that's not normal, and how it takes a little piece of them, every time they experience something like that.
Yeah.
And that's why I asked that question. Like, is there, are there different things that we deal with than other places don't deal with?
Mhm. Well,
What
why
do you?
the
Go
murder
ahead.
on TV? Like, for instance, George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Tavon,
Hmm.
Tavon, all of those murders that we witnessed, especially over the COVID.
Right.
Some people, I always say it can be traumatic. So you have a traumatic event, right? But it may
Right.
not be traumatic to somebody else, but it may have been
Right.
traumatic to you. But all
Right.
those incidents, we see increase in trauma responses, increase in need for
Right.
therapy, and increase for need of treatment. And so, yeah, watching those things, watching your people die randomly in the street is devastating, can be devastating on a community, and especially on Black people.
What is it that you know, with the exception of therapy, what is it that people who are in communities like this, when something tragic happens, what should their response, especially people who want to help in communities like this,
Mhm.
and you see something tragic that happens, and that this is going to lead to a lot of to trauma, especially let's say when it's something like kids, or there was over the summer in DC, there was a drive-by shooting and an 8-year-old was shot, and the outpouring of just thoughts and everything for that particular event. What is some when someone wants to help, and that this is what's happening in this community? What can they do? What can they put together? Like how does one try to heal? And they don't got degrees, and they just
Right,
know. Yeah.
right. Providing spaces to be able to just talk. Spaces. We had a traumatic event happen as well. Over the summer, a young man was murdered in the street naked, by his perpetrator. So he was being held captive, right? Sexual sex trafficking, being held captive, and he was murdered in the street in broad daylight. And so,
Wow.
again, the same thing, outpouring. And this is a smaller community where everybody knows everybody. So a lot of
Right.
it tends to really hit,
Yeah, that's yeah, it's tough. Yeah.
providing spaces just to talk, having panels and forums. You don't, it's always nice when you have an expert or someone there that can facilitate, but it does not necessary, just being extremely kind to one another, having a lot of compassion, having those memorials really help where people can come and mourn together as a group, as a family. Those things help as well. But again, just reaching out, texting, checking in with each other, and providing those spaces to have those conversations. You don't have to be a expert or professional or have a degree to do that.
Yeah, I found that the lack of, sometimes a lack of resources in the community would, leads to a lack of experts to help in times where, especially when it's a low income community, and the resources are low. And then sometimes there are people who have the heart for it. And it's like, well, what do we tell those people? Like they have the heart to go into the community, and people in churches and ministry and those type of things that have the heart to do that, but they won't exactly know what to do. Like, you know what I
Mhm.
mean? And I think sometimes because we don't know what to do, we do a lot of superficial stuff,
Yeah.
or stuff that like let's just a lot of superficial stuff, because we don't know what to do, we don't know what to say. And so that's and so that's one of the reasons that I asked that question, because I know that I just know of personally, you know, just situations that have happened, when the church will go in, but they won't really have, they aren't equipped with the with what it takes to help in that community.
Mhm.
Speaking of the church, is there things that the church could do more to help with trauma in the Black community?
Oh, wow. That yes, definitely. I've had experiences, and again, this is not to speak of every church, right? At
Of
all.
course not.
I am a Christian. I attend church regularly, several times a week, and wouldn't be able to make it through the week without my church, right? Without
Right.
that word. So let me be clear, make that really clear. This is not an attack on the church. This is just some observance or observations that I've made as a psychologist. A lot of time, the church does not support therapy. It's one of those things where it's like Jesus can heal all, and he can, hands down. Jesus can heal everything without no help. He don't need no help, right? But everybody's in different places on their journeys in terms of spiritually, right? Someone may not be as spiritually strong as someone else to just seek the Lord by himself and get what they need. And so that, and God put people, helpers in the world. God put human beings in the world for a reason. Paul was a physician, and God was a Jesus. Paul, they walked with Jesus, and one of
Right.
the disciples was a physician, and so these things are necessary, right? These things are necessary in the body of Christ. And so I would say that we can support them getting additional services outside of the church. That is not an indictment of the church if you say to one of your members, hey, I know I'm a pastor, but I don't do trauma. I don't do trauma therapy, and so I need for you to seek out additional
Right,
counseling.
to seek
You
it.
know, I
Yeah.
support you here. Definitely, I think that's important, especially when you're dealing with trauma. And then the support bringing mental health professionals in to speak about trauma. Like, the mental health professional doesn't have to be a holy sanctified preacher. It would be great if they were, but
Right.
they're coming in, they're not preaching a message about Jesus and the cross. They're preaching a message about trauma, how it affects the body, and here are some things you can do to help buffer that.
Sure.
And yeah, I think I misspoke. Paul was a tent maker, right? One of the disciples was a physician, and right now it leaves my mind.
Yeah, absolutely. That's you're totally cool. But that's so real. That's so cool. We got to get to a point where I think that people are placed in the world. As humans, we're all sort of interconnected, and people are placed here, and it doesn't necessarily mean that you're gonna touch the hem of his garment and get miraculously healed. Not that can't happen, but
Right.
it doesn't necessarily mean that that is the way it's going to happen. Sometimes your healing is in the process of how you care for yourself, and the people God puts in place to help you heal. You got a lot to offer us, man. Of course, we got limited time, but you have a lot to offer. I want to ask you a
Come back.
question that
Gotta come back. That's why we just
I
got.
know, I know. Got to. So there are different times of the year where I have different things, but trauma, dealing with trauma specifically in the Black community, and then specifically in the Black church,
Yeah.
is something that I am really in 2021, and especially after having the year of 2020 that we had when it was lockdowns and COVID and distance learning, and I mean, like, depression, and there's a lot of abuse, like there's a lot of abuse that happened in the year of 2020, because you're dealing with, you have to come home to a person that 24 hours in a house with a person that a lot of times you don't like,
Yeah.
and a lot of people were sending their kids to school to just get away from them, and
Yeah.
so, like, a lot of things were happening in 2020 that we're going to be healing from in
Yeah.
2021.
Yeah.
And so I definitely I have plans to do a lot of these type of shows, so I'm definitely going to bring you back to talk to some of my
Great.
pastor friends, and some of and just to have a panel. So that this is going to be definitely going to be good. I want to ask you a question, however,
Sure.
that I ask everybody that comes on the Elevation podcast, right? And I love to see the differences in everyone's answer, and it's always fun to ask. So, if you could, in fact, if God gave you the grace to change one thing about the world, or one thing about people, or however you interpret that question, one thing about the world, what would it be?
That we can do nothing without Christ. That would be if everyone had a working understanding and knowledge that all of this pain and all of this dissension and all of this may not exist if we realize that without Christ we are nothing. So we lift ourselves up and we want to boast on degrees, education, material possessions, right?
Right,
But
right.
nothing without Jesus, we are nothing. So that's one thing if I could, change, is that everyone know that they know that true peace, true love, true satisfaction, true contentment comes through a relationship with Jesus Christ.
That was the minister, not the psychologist, that just came out right there.
Yeah, yeah, that was definitely the minister.
So, how could one get in contact with you? I know you were in Harrisburg, but like you said, there are definitely the remote ways of getting in contact with people. How could one get in contact with you?
So I am blessed and highly favored in terms of I've always got a waiting list. So I have never had openings, but I do have two male therapists, wonderful therapists under the private practice, Petropsychological Services. And so we're at www.one two P's as in Paul, S as in Sam.com. That if you reach out to that website, it has all of our contact information, and we actually have a 24-hour answering service. Generally, somebody gets back to you within a day. I also am a founder and the clinical director of a trauma-based program. So now I do outpatient at one PPS, but we do other things, right? But HALA is a trauma-informed trauma therapy umbrella, where we provide trauma-informed classroom training for teachers to develop trauma-informed classrooms for children that have been traumatized. We also do intensive trauma-focused CBT in the home. So we have a family-based team that goes into the home and provides intensive family-based training and healing. It's a 6 to 8 week program. We have mentoring, where we provide education on sexual abuse and how to avoid trafficking and grooming and things of that nature. So HAL is like a big program. So that's, well, it's small in number, but I mean big in services. So that's
big an idea. I got you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I thank you so much, Dawn, for coming on. It has been just definitely been a pleasure and informative to speak to you. And like I said, I definitely want to keep you in the loop and because some of the other things that I have going on this year, I definitely think you're going to add some great things to the conversation. I really appreciate you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. It was awesome. It was an awesome experience.
All right. Thank you so much. This has been the Elevation Podcast. My name is Shawn Riff-Raff. I am appreciative to y'all who follow me and who listen. And I hope that these journeys that we go on help everybody increase their life or elevate their life. Thank you so much. We'll talk to you next time. Peace. When I was 20 years old, I started one of the first multi-artist gospel rap labels in the country. Who listens to that, they said. That has no future is what they told me. That's a dead end, they kept repeating. That's a career killer, they warned me. What they didn't understand is that a pioneer can see past what you think is possible and has the endurance to push it through. And my new media television platform is that pioneer's mind at work once again. I give the unheard a voice. I give the marginalized a stage. And I give the unfortunate a good hand. This is Christian media like you've never seen it before. Because this is Shawn Riff-Raff Studios.
I'm a Christian with $100 million vision. Can nobody box me and say that's a contradiction? Goal driven, God just blessed me with the ambition. Look up when the rest, he rests the definition. Been through hell, but the fire couldn't crisp them. Shut down the mouths of anybody, you dismissed them. 20 years gospel rap broke all the traditions. Cause from a teenager I was on the same mission. So when he running God business, he got clothing, plus he got the boss with him. He got a squad with him, real no frauds with him. He run into the light cause he is